Imagine this. You're at a birthday party with 40 guests, and right in the middle of it, your mother says your daughter isn't her biological granddaughter. What would you do? That happened to me at my mother's birthday 2 years ago. I couldn't believe the woman who gave birth to me would say something so cruel about my daughter and my husband. As I walked out the door, ready to leave, my grandmother stopped me and asked me to return. Then she revealed a shocking truth that tore apart the peaceful family I thought we had. So, what did my grandmother reveal? Stay with me. Tell me the story of what happened. Hello, everyone. My name is Anya. I'm 32 years old, living with my husband, Ray, and our daughter, Callie, in a 3-bedroom house in San Antonio, Texas. I work as an operations manager for a shipping company, and Ray is a nurse at the local hospital. Our life right now is peaceful. Warm mornings with coffee, Callie's laughter before school, evenings spent watching movies or cooking and having dinner together. But today's peace wouldn't be possible without my grandmother, Linda. She's 80 years old, her hair silver, but her eyes are still sharp. She's healthy and so clear-minded that I sometimes forget her age. She lives with my father, Dennis, in a cozy old wooden house just 10 miles north of the city. 2 years ago, she was the one who stood up for us at my mom's 55th birthday party and protected us from hurtful words. She was willing to risk the happiness of her only son, my father, the person she loved more than anything. Ever since that birthday, I felt a deep sense of gratitude toward her. My family made a promise to take good care of her because we know the time we have left with her is limited. Our story occurred in June 2023 on a scorching afternoon typical of a Texas summer. 3 days before my mother's birthday, just after we finished dinner and cleared the kitchen dishes, the phone suddenly rang. I looked at the screen and saw the caller ID. My mom, Elaine. Her usual firm tone informed me about the upcoming birthday party invitation. At first, I politely declined, explaining that work had me tied up, but she immediately shifted to a more forceful approach. Her voice was stern as she said, "This is my 55th birthday. I've invited nearly 40 guests. You have to come." Hearing that demanding tone, I felt irritated and replied bluntly, "I'm not coming. Every time we visit, you find a reason to fight with Ray and Callie." After I said that, she went quiet for a few seconds. Then, in a suddenly softer voice, she said, "I won't cause any trouble that day. Don't make people wonder why you're not there. I don't want to be embarrassed." Before I could respond, she abruptly hung up, not allowing me to say no again. When I returned to the dining table, Ray looked at me curiously and asked about the call. I told him about my mom's invitation and her promise not to stir up trouble during the party. After hearing everything, Ray fell silent. Deep in thought, the worry on his face said it all. I knew he was torn. Part of him didn't want to hear more cruel, hurtful words from my mom, but another part didn't want to be the reason my mom lost face in front of her guests. We just sat there facing each other in silence, neither rushing to make a final decision. To help you understand why we didn't want to attend my mother's birthday party, I need to tell you about the deep-rooted conflicts that had been building for years. It all started when we refused to lend my younger brother Daniel $20,000 for his wedding in 2018. At that time, Callie, our daughter, was only 3 years old. After years of hard work, Ray and I had managed to save up a substantial amount, nearly $200,000. It resulted from living frugally, working overtime, and giving up many personal pleasures. We had planned to use that money to buy our first home, a dream we had cherished for so long. When my mom asked how we were doing during a visit to see the family, we happened to mention that we had been looking at houses over the weekend. With her usual sharp instincts, she immediately assumed we had a sizable savings. 3 months after that conversation, she officially asked me to lend Daniel the hefty sum to fund his wedding. Our decision to say no wasn't out of selfishness or a lack of family love. That money came from years of sacrifice and relentless saving. But more importantly, my mom and Daniel had borrowed money from us 5 times before. While the amounts were smaller, totaling around $5,000 between them, they had never once offered to repay us, not even mentioned it. After we turned down the $20,000 request, my mom and Daniel changed completely. From being close family, they became silent, persistent antagonists. Whenever they came to visit us or during any family gathering, my mom would look for ways to pick a fight with Ray. She often made nasty, veiled comments, suggesting that Callie wasn't my daughter, and implied that Ray was not a respectable man. These subtle jabs were like tiny blades, slowly cutting into my husband's heart. Things got even worse during Christmas of 2022. In front of everyone at our family gathering, my mom publicly declared that Ray was the reason I had turned my back on the family. Those cruel accusations turned what should have been a sacred holiday into a nightmare. My dad, Dennis, stepped in many times, asking my mom to show respect to her son-in-law. But each time, she'd respond by bursting into tears in front of everyone, then locking herself in her room, leaving my dad and the rest of the family awkward and embarrassed. Meanwhile, my grandmother, Linda, never directly got involved in the conflicts, but after each episode, she would quietly call or even come over in person to comfort and encourage Ray. Her genuine kindness felt like a warm light during our darkest days. Because we didn't want to upset my dad and grandmother, we still tried to attend family gatherings. Despite the tension with my mom and brother, after Christmas in 2022, we decided we weren't returning anymore. I knew the decision would disappoint my dad and grandma, but I couldn't let my husband keep enduring the cruel and hurtful words from my mother. At the family gatherings that followed, my dad often blamed my mom for tearing the family apart. She never argued back, but the resentment she held toward my husband and daughter kept growing quietly every day. And when that anger finally peaked, she secretly devised a cruel plan for revenge, aimed directly at Ray on her birthday. Back to my story. After my mother's high-pressure invitation, Ray suddenly spoke up the next morning while we were having breakfast in the dining room. With a calm voice, but full of resolve, my husband said, "I thought about it all night. Let's go to the birthday party. If she keeps her word, that's great. But if not, this will be the last time we see her." Hearing those words, I paused mid-slice with the bread knife in my hand and took a moment to think. Looking into his slightly tired eyes, I could tell Ray had come to this decision after a sleepless night of tossing and turning. Finally, I nodded and said, "All right. In that case, we'll bring our secret weapon." Hearing that, he smiled softly, a smile that held both understanding and trust in our decision together. He slightly nodded, as if to say we were ready for whatever came next. We had naively hoped everything would go smoothly and peacefully that sunny morning. We had no idea the events about to unfold at that birthday party would become haunting memories we'd carry for the rest of our lives. At 5 p.m. on Sunday, we drove to my parents' house for the party, arriving on time, just as my mother had told us to. I noticed that only a few guests had arrived as we entered the yard. The atmosphere was still relaxed and intimate. Daniel's family had already shown up early. His wife was away on a business trip, so it was just Daniel and his son. My dad was sitting on the wooden porch swing holding Jack, Daniel's 6-year-old boy. The scene looked warm and peaceful. The moment my dad saw us, he quickly greeted us, his face lighting up with a genuine smile. Callie, spotting her grandpa, ran over excitedly and hugged him tightly. Watching my father hold Jack in one arm, while gently patting Callie's head with the other, the two grandkids clinging to him, I felt a wave of indescribable happiness wash over me. These were the moments I cherished most during family gatherings. We all headed inside after exchanging greetings and a few words with my dad. Grandma Linda sat comfortably in the living room, chatting cheerfully with a few neighbors my mom had invited to the party. As soon as she saw Ray and me, she stood up, face beaming, and opened her arms to hug us. Her warm hug gave us a quiet strength and sense of reassurance. Ray decided to stay and join Grandma's conversation with the guests, while I went to find my mother to wish her a happy birthday. She was outside at the barbecue area along the side of the house, busy checking dishes and preparing for the meal. I walked up to her and handed over the gift we had prepared, a light blue silk scarf. I said in a friendly tone, "Happy birthday, Mom." As she accepted the gift and smiled happily, I gently reminded her, "Don't forget what you promised me." Right after I said that, I saw a flicker of hesitation cross her face, like she was thinking something over, but then she quickly smiled and nodded, saying, "Don't worry, promise." Hearing her say it so firmly gave me more peace of mind. At that moment, I still believed she would keep her promise. Around 6 p.m., when nearly all 40 guests had arrived, just as my mom had said, the party began with the traditional happy birthday song. The singing filled the warm space, creating a joyful and heartfelt atmosphere. After the song ended, amid enthusiastic applause, my mom smiled happily and blew out the candles on a large birthday cake, officially kicking off the celebration. My mom had ordered high-quality dishes from a well-known local restaurant to avoid spending too much time and effort on cooking. It wasn't a lavish or expensive party, but the food was beautifully arranged on pristine white porcelain plates, and the taste was genuinely impressive. Everyone had something good to say about it. We all enjoyed the delicious food while constantly complimenting my mom for finding a great place to cater. The atmosphere quickly became more lively and intimate than ever. Throughout the party, we toasted repeatedly to my mom's birthday, shared lighthearted everyday stories, and enjoyed each other's company. Uncle Anthony, my dad's cousin, asked me about my current work and career plans. Aunt Hannah, my mom's younger sister, showed much interest in Ray's job, asking him questions about medical issues and his experiences working at the hospital. Occasionally, some older relatives excitedly shared childhood memories or old family stories, which made the entire party feel even warmer and more joyful. Seeing how cheerful the party had become, I truly believed my mom had kept her promise. For nearly the first full hour of the party, she didn't say anything about my husband or daughter that could be taken as hurtful. I believed she had changed, that her change was honest and sincere, but I didn't know that she had only been patiently waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike with a brutal opening blow. All it would take was for someone to mention my family casually, and she would seize that moment to say exactly what she had been planning all along. About an hour into the party, the mood shifted to lighter desserts after everyone had eaten their fill. The atmosphere was still cheerful and relaxed, with laughter and conversations echoing through the spacious dining room. At that moment, my dad had both grandkids wrapped in his arms. My 8-year-old daughter, Callie, rested her head on his left shoulder, while Jack clung to his right. The warmth of the scene touched everyone who saw it, a perfect image of deep family love. Seeing that touching moment between a grandfather and his grandchildren, Aunt Hannah, a kind, observant woman in her mid-50s, smiled and looked at my mother. In a sincere voice, she said, "Ayla and Dennis are so lucky to have two such adorable grandchildren." But when those words left her mouth, my mom responded without hesitation. Her voice was cold and firm. "I only have one grandchild." Her words hit the room like a bolt of lightning. Every fork froze midair, every conversation cut off, and all eyes turned toward her in stunned silence and confusion. But my mom didn't stop there. She slowly picked up her glass of red wine, lifted it in a mocking toast, and smirked, an icy smile filled with spite. And then what she said next sliced through the room like a blade, severing the last thread of the mother-daughter bond between us. She turned her gaze toward Ray and me, her eyes sweeping past us with contempt, then locked onto Callie, still sitting innocently in my father's lap. In a voice that could have frozen fire, she declared, "Callie is not my grandchild. She doesn't look anything like this family." The moment those cruel words left her mouth, my dad jumped out of his chair, shouting in shock and fury, "Ella, what the hell are you saying?" In that tense instant, Grandma Linda was so stunned, she dropped the cane she had been holding. The sound of it hitting the tiled floor echoed loudly and sharply in the silence, but none of us looked down at it. Every eye in the room was fixed on my mother, the woman who had just said something so brutally cruel and heartless. I immediately turned to Ray, and my heart shattered into pieces when I saw the first tears begin to fall from his face. Meanwhile, Daniel, my brother, had the exact opposite reaction. He was looking at us smugly, like this was the moment he had been waiting for all along. Seconds later, when no one else was looking, Daniel leaned in toward me and whispered with venom in his voice, "This is what you get for turning your back on family." Then he slowly sat back in his chair, his face twisted with satisfaction and malice. A few moments later, realizing everyone was still staring at her in shock and confusion, my mother forced a light, fake smile. She quickly tried to brush it off in a voice that feigned normalcy. "I was just joking. Both kids are my grandkids. They're my pride and joy." But her weak excuse didn't land. Awkward, forced smiles began to appear on the faces of the guests as they attempted to resume their earlier conversations. Though the air in the room was no longer warm or joyful, the energy had been broken and everyone could feel it. As for me, I just sat there staring at my mother, eyes filled with disappointment and anger. I knew then that she had deliberately betrayed her promise to us. Seeing the bitter, satisfied smirk on her face, Daniel's cruel, triumphant eyes, and Ray, the person I love most in this world, with tears streaming down his cheeks, I felt a rage rise from my chest. But more than that, I was furious at myself for being foolish enough to believe, hope, and agree to show up to this brutal, calculated gathering. That was when I realized this wasn't an emotional outburst. It was a carefully planned act of revenge executed with cold, deliberate cruelty. About 2 minutes later, just as the party seemed to be returning to some semblance of normalcy with forced small talk and uneasy smiles, I sat in silence, deeply reflecting on everything that had just happened. My mother's cruel words kept echoing in my head, and I realized I couldn't take it anymore. This wasn't just a random outburst, the peak of years of emotional damage that had been building up. Finally, I made a firm decision. I slowly stood up from my chair, and all eyes in the room turned toward me. Looking directly at Grandma Linda and my father, the two people I respect most in this family, I spoke with a steady, unwavering voice. I've had enough. With all due respect to Grandma and Dad, I must protect my husband and daughter. After my declaration, the room fell silent once again. The guests froze mid-bite or mid-conversation, their eyes fixed on me with curiosity and concern. Aunt Hannah, always the one trying to play peacemaker in the family, immediately spoke up in a gentle, pleading tone. If there's an issue, let's talk it out calmly. It's your mother's birthday. Don't ruin this day. But despite her kind words and the worried looks from everyone around me, I was done staying silent. I had reached my limit, and it was time for the truth to come out. So I began to speak clearly and without hesitation, telling everyone exactly where the cracks in our family had started. I told them how my mother and Daniel had asked us to lend $20,000 for Daniel's wedding and how we refused. I explained that our refusal wasn't out of selfishness or a lack of love for family, but because they had already borrowed $5,000 from us over 5 separate occasions, and not once had they attempted to repay it or even mentioned paying it back. That alone was reason enough for us not to trust them with more. Then I began to share what my husband and daughter had endured since that moment. I told them how my mother and Daniel treated Ray cruelly and contemptuously. I described the accusations, how my mother had called Ray unworthy, hinted that I was not a respectable woman, and constantly questioned whether Callie was truly my child. These were not careless slips. They were calculated, malicious remarks meant to hurt. I didn't leave out Christmas of 2022, the day my mother openly blamed Ray in front of our extended family, accusing him of being the reason I turned my back on them. I told them how Ray endured years of bitter words, judgmental stares, and unfair treatment from his mother-in-law. Everyone at that party listened closely. No one interrupted. I could see the surprise in their eyes, shock, confusion, and maybe even guilt for not having noticed sooner. While I was still in the middle of sharing these painful truths, my mother suddenly snapped. She could no longer hold back and screamed, her voice filled with rage. "Enough, Anya. You're embarrassing me in front of everyone." Right after that, Daniel jumped in, his tone full of challenge and hostility. "Your family should just leave this party. Stop causing drama here." When Daniel finished speaking, I knew it was time to reveal the most crucial piece of evidence, the one thing we had prepared for precisely this moment. I slowly reached into my purse and pulled out a neatly folded paper. This was the secret weapon we had mentioned earlier. I held the paper up for everyone to see and spoke each word clearly and deliberately. "This is the DNA test result for me and Callie. We took this test to prove to my mother that Callie is without question my biological daughter, and that I have never been the unfaithful woman my mother has accused me of being all these years." After making the announcement, I began passing the test result around so everyone at the party could see and confirm it. They took turns reading it, their eyes filled with surprise and curiosity as they looked over the precise numbers and unmistakable conclusion in the report. My mother sat completely still, frozen like a statue. The color drained from her face. Daniel looked like he wanted to say something, maybe defend himself or deny it, but he stayed silent in the face of undeniable scientific proof. My father then turned to my mother, his voice shaking with a mix of anger and heartbreak as he yelled, "Are you satisfied now? I told you never to doubt our son-in-law." Faced with my father's rightful outrage and the pressure of undeniable evidence, my mother could do nothing but sit there in silence. She had no words, no defense, no way to explain or excuse what she had done. After the DNA test result was placed directly in front of my mother, I looked her straight in the eyes, my gaze heavy with disappointment, and said, Are you satisfied now? Ray and I have known each other since we were 18. We married in love right after college with nothing but purity and honesty, and yet you chose to slander and accuse me most ruthlessly. You don't deserve to be my mother." After I spoke those words, I turned to look at Ray. He held my hand tightly under the table, his fingers trembling with emotion. Through tears, his voice cracked as he whispered, "Thank you for standing up for me." Hearing those raw, heartfelt words, I knew with absolute certainty that I had done the right thing. Nothing mattered more than protecting the dignity and integrity of the people I loved most. Not wanting to stay any longer or witness any more ugliness or pointless arguments, I leaned down and said softly to my husband, "Let's go." Ray nodded in agreement, and together we stood up. We walked over to where my father was still sitting with Callie in his arms. I gently reached out, picked up my daughter, and held her close. Seeing the sadness and pain etched across my father's face, and the heartbreak in Grandma Linda's eyes made something twist inside my chest. I spoke quietly, my voice filled with regret. "I'm sorry, Dad. Grandma." With that sincere apology, the three of us turned and walked straight toward the door, determined, heads held high, ignoring the eyes that followed us and the hushed whispers buzzing behind our backs. Just 2 steps away from the front door, 2 steps from finally walking out of that house filled with painful memories, Grandma Linda suddenly stood up from her armchair and shouted, her voice powerful and commanding, "Come back here." Her sharp, unwavering voice startled all three of us, Ray, Callie, and me, so strongly that we visibly flinched. In my entire life, I had never seen my grandmother this angry. Her voice, usually soft and gentle, now carried the weight of authority, firm, resolute, and impossible to ignore. At first, I thought we had done something to upset her, that she was disappointed in how we handled things. But then I looked into her eyes, and that's when I realized her fury wasn't directed at us. It was aimed squarely at my mother. Obeying her call, we slowly turned back toward the party, stepping into a room thick with tense silence. Grandma Linda had left her chair and walked toward us with steady, determined steps. Despite her age, she moved with the energy and purpose of a warrior, someone ready to fight for what was right. A few seconds later, once she was certain everyone could hear her loud and clear, she raised her voice and declared, "Anya has just revealed the truth about her daughter's DNA, so now I reveal the truth about the DNA between me and my other grandchild, Daniel." The words exploded through the room like a bomb. Guests gasped. Conversations halted. Heads turned. Confused whispers broke out as everyone looked around between Grandma, my mother, and Daniel, trying to understand what this all meant. Sitting in stunned silence, my father suddenly shot up from his seat like he'd been hit with an electric shock. His face was pale, confused, his voice trembling as he stammered, "Mom, what truth? What are you talking about with Daniel?" Grandma turned to him, her eyes filled with deep love and aching sorrow. With a steady, gentle but serious tone, she said, "Sit down, son, and brace yourself." Though he had no idea what was coming, the weight of her words told him it was serious, severe enough to obey without question. He slowly sat down, cautious, visibly shaken. Then, in the thick silence of the room, Grandma shifted her gaze to my mother. Her eyes were razor-sharp. Her voice, calm but firm, cut through the tension like a knife as she asked, "Ela, tell me, who is Daniel's real father?" That question was a second bomb, bigger than the first. The entire room froze, like time had stopped. I turned to look at Ray, and we both had the same look of shock and confusion on our faces. We had no idea what was happening. No clue what Grandma was suggesting, or why she would ask something so outrageous. My father sat frozen, pale as a ghost. Daniel looked stunned, his mouth hanging open in disbelief, unable to process what he had just heard. And my mother, she looked rattled. I could see it. There was hesitation, panic, and the unmistakable flicker of someone trying to figure out how to escape an impossible situation. After a long stretch of silence, my mother finally replied, her tone trying too hard to sound casual. "I don't know what you're talking about." But Grandma wasn't buying it. She was holding herself together, but I could feel her resolve hardening. Her voice, this time sharper, clearer, left no room for evasion. "I'm giving you one last chance to tell the truth. Don't force me to say it myself, because once I do, there's no going back." But even with that warning, even with her back against the wall, my mother refused to back down. She suddenly stood up, locking eyes with Grandma with pure defiance, and shouted, "You're doing this to get back at me for defending Ray, aren't you? You're making this up to humiliate me." That outburst, loud, angry, and full of accusation, told me everything I needed to know. Something deeper was at play, something none of us had ever been told. A history between my mother and grandmother had remained hidden for decades. The air in the room became so heavy and tense that it felt like you could slice it with a knife. And in that moment, I still didn't know that karma would come crashing down on my mother within the next 5 minutes. Swift, devastating, and undeniable. Faced with my mother's stubborn denial, Grandma fell silent for a few seconds, as if weighing the gravity of what she was about to say. She took a deep breath, bracing herself, and then in a voice steady and irrefutable, she declared, "Daniel is not Dennis's son." The entire room went dead silent. Not a whisper, not a breath. Every eye turned to Grandma, filled with anticipation, confusion, and unease, waiting for her to explain. Immediately, my mother screamed, her voice shrill with desperation and fury. "You're lying! You're slandering me!" My father, standing there as if the ground beneath him had crumbled, stumbled out of his chair. He rushed toward Grandma, his voice shaking, almost begging. "Mom, if you know the truth, please tell me everything." Grandma let out a deep, heavy sigh, the kind that carries the weight of decades, as if she were about to open a sealed vault of memories long buried. And then she began to tell the story that had been hidden for so many years. She began recounting the events of 2008, a year our family would never forget. Daniel was just 13 years old when he was involved in a serious accident. He had been hit by a car while crossing the street on his way home from school. The crash was sudden and violent, leaving Daniel critically injured and in desperate need of an emergency blood transfusion. My father and I rushed to the hospital as soon as we heard, both of us ready to do anything to save him. We volunteered to donate blood immediately, but after the required tests, the doctor delivered shocking news to my grandmother. Neither my father nor I was a blood match for Daniel. His blood type was utterly different from ours. After hearing that, Grandma immediately asked the doctor to keep the results confidential. She only told my father and me that the doctors had deemed our health too unstable for safe donation. To save Daniel's life and time, the hospital had to use blood from their reserve supply. But behind the scenes, Grandma had already requested something else, a secret DNA test for the three of us. The results confirmed a heartbreaking truth. My father and I were genetically related as mother and daughter, but Daniel had no biological connection to my father at all. As Grandma finished telling this long-buried story, the faces of everyone in the room changed again, shifting from initial curiosity to utter disbelief. The shock was total. My father, after hearing everything, couldn't stay standing. His legs gave out and he collapsed to the floor. Ray and I rushed to his side, helping to hold him up and trying to offer him comfort. He looked at Grandma, his eyes filled with pain and devastation, and asked in a broken voice, "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you wait all these years?" Grandma replied with a heavy heart. She explained that at the time, my father was living in happiness, and she couldn't bear to destroy that. Daniel, back then, was still a kind and innocent little boy. She didn't want to leave him with emotional scars that might never heal. But tonight, witnessing how my mother and Daniel had treated Ray with cruelty and injustice, she could no longer stay silent. She had chosen this moment, my mother's birthday, to reveal the truth because justice had to be served. The second Grandma finished speaking, Daniel shot up from his chair and stormed toward her, shouting in disbelief, "I don't believe anything you're saying." My mother also lost control. Her voice shrieked with desperation as she yelled, "You're lying about me. I'll sue you for slander." But Grandma was done arguing. She looked at my mother with an expression of pure pity and calmly replied, "Sue me if you want. Just make sure you take a DNA test first." That one sentence shut everything down. My mother froze. She had no comeback, no denial, no further defense. It was as if she finally realized the truth had cornered her and there was nowhere to run. As for my father, he had just suffered a blow more painful than anything else in his life. He buried his face in his hands and began to sob uncontrollably. 28 years of love, sacrifices, and devotion reduced to a cruel joke. Everything he had believed, everything he had built with sincerity, had been built on a lie. A while later, after managing to calm himself and regain control of his emotions, my father slowly stood up and walked over to my mother. But instead of shouting or exploding with rage like everyone might have expected, he spoke calmly, yet full of heartbreak. "So it turns out," he said, "the one who's been unfaithful in this family was you." My mother, now fully grasping the magnitude of her mistake and the devastating consequences that came with it, stood up and clutched my father's arm in desperation. "I'm sorry," she pleaded, her voice shaking. "Please give me a chance to make this right." But my father gently but firmly pulled his arm away. He looked at her with cold eyes, stripped of all warmth, and said with finality, "We're getting a divorce. You have 30 days to leave this house. From this moment on, you're no longer my wife." My mother lost all control. She began screaming, wild, incoherent cries that echoed through the house. Seeing the scene unravel, the remaining guests quickly stood up and made their way out, unwilling to witness any more of this heartbreaking spectacle. My father turned to Grandma and with a tired but grateful voice said, "I'll take you back to your room." Grandma looked at him with nothing but love and pride. She nodded and replied softly, "You did the right thing. I'm proud of you. Stay strong." After my father and Grandma disappeared into the hallway, leaving behind a room in chaos, my mother, still in a rage-fueled spiral, suddenly lunged toward Ray. She raised her hand as if to grab him by the collar, maybe to unleash all her fury on the man she blamed for everything. But I was faster. I stepped in and caught her wrist midair, stopping her before she could lay a finger on my husband. Looking her dead in the eyes, I said in a low, firm voice, "If you ever touch Ray, I swear I will never forgive you." A few seconds passed in heavy silence. Then, with nothing left to say, Ray and I turned and walked away from the chaos, out of the house filled with screaming and confusion, leaving behind my mother and Daniel, who now had no choice but to confront and accept the brutal truths that had finally come to light. That night, after we returned home, neither Ray nor I could close our eyes even for a second. After the chaos of the party, my husband rewarded me for standing up for him with warm hugs and heartfelt praise. There was something profoundly tender in how he looked at me. Not just love, but gratitude, pride, and the quiet strength of someone who had finally been defended after years of silent endurance. We lay there side by side, wrapped in the same silence, but lost in separate thoughts, each replaying the shockwaves of everything that had happened just hours earlier. Scenes from the party kept flashing in my mind like a film reel. My mother's cruel smile, my father's devastated eyes, and the unforgettable moment when Grandma revealed the truth. Every frame was etched into memory with painful clarity, impossible to forget. But through it all, the person I worried about most was my dad. He had spent 28 years, nearly 3 decades, loving, raising, and caring for Daniel, as if he were his flesh and blood. And yet my mother had coldly deceived him the entire time. Lying there in the dark, staring at the ceiling in our quiet home, I silently hoped and prayed that he was okay, that somehow he would find a way to survive the betrayal, that he'd be able to rise from the wreckage and piece himself back together. In the days following my mother's explosive birthday party, I received several phone calls from Grandma Linda. She kept me updated on the chaos inside my parents' home, none of which was easy to hear. According to her, my mother had been repeatedly begging my father not to go through with the divorce. Her actions had grown more desperate by the day. She didn't just apologize on her knees. She even went so far as to slam her head against a wall, threatening to take her own life, in hopes that he might pity her enough to forgive her. But my father, after nearly 3 decades of cruel deception, had no compassion left for the woman who had once been his wife. The betrayal had cut too deep. He had officially filed for divorce with the local court, and the petition had already been accepted for review. The court would schedule a mediation session between both parties per legal procedure. The divorce would move to the final hearing stage if no resolution could be reached. As for Daniel, the story had become even more heartbreaking. Grandma told me that under pressure from the undeniable truth, my mother eventually confessed everything to my father. Daniel was not his son. He was the result of an affair she had with her first love. They had run into each other at a social event years ago, and that one reckless night had led to Daniel's conception. Since the revelation, Daniel had been an emotional freefall. He hadn't spoken to my mother since the party, completely cutting her off, as if trying to erase every connection to her. Grandma also said that my father had made the painful decision to sever ties with Daniel. He told her he would no longer acknowledge him as his son, And while nearly 3 decades of memories couldn't simply vanish overnight, the man Daniel had become was no longer the sweet, respectful boy my father once raised. That bond, in his eyes, was gone. After each call with Grandma, I was left sitting in silence, overwhelmed by guilt and internal conflict. Had I been the one who shattered my father's happiness? Should I have stayed quiet and let things continue as they were? I couldn't stop asking myself those questions. And with every unanswered thought, I sank deeper into a fog of regret, struggling to make peace with the destruction that had followed the truth. 1 week after my mother's birthday party, Ray, Callie, and I invited my dad and Grandma to dinner at a cozy little restaurant near our home. We hoped that a quiet, intimate meal would bring a bit of light to his days that had been filled with darkness and heartbreak. Even though it was just the 5 of us, the atmosphere was warm and peaceful that evening. For the first time since everything happened, I saw my dad smile again, just faintly as he played with Callie. But it was a genuine smile. As the meal was coming to an end, I finally found the courage to ask something that had been weighing on me heavily. Looking directly into his eyes, I asked, my voice filled with hesitation and worry, "Dad, are you mad at me for destroying your peace?" He didn't respond right away. Instead, he turned his gaze toward Callie, sitting beside him, laughing innocently. Then he looked back at me, his expression soft, and said with a genuine smile, "I should be thanking you. Because of you, I know the truth. Being lied to for 28 years is painful, but it's still better than dying someday, never knowing I'd been lied to my entire life." His words, laced with wisdom and dry humor, made us laugh. It was a natural, unforced kind of laughter that lifts an invisible weight off your chest. A few moments later, my dad turned toward Grandma, who had been sitting quietly throughout dinner. In a voice filled with gratitude, he said, "Thank you, Mom, for everything you've done." Grandma didn't reply with words. Instead, she smiled, a gentle smile that held love, comfort, and quiet strength. Ray and I both turned to her too, and in unison, we said with heartfelt sincerity, "Thank you, Grandma." That's when she suddenly burst into laughter, a full, natural laugh that surprised all of us. Then, with her signature blunt honesty, she said, "I was ready to take this secret to the grave, but your mother, she went too far, accusing Ray like that without proof. While she's the one who cheated and lied for years, I couldn't stay silent anymore." Hearing those words, I realized, maybe for the first time, just how much Grandma had carried all these years. The guilt, the weight of the secret, the pain of watching her son live in a lie. And still, she chose to protect us, to stand up for the truth. 1 month after the birthday party, my mother officially packed up her belongings and moved out of the house she had called her home for 3 decades. At first, in desperation, she tried to claim part of the shared assets, especially the house. But when my father presented clear legal proof that the house was an inheritance gifted by my grandfather 20 years ago, with a will specifically naming my father as the sole beneficiary, my mother had no choice but to back down. She left with nothing but the clothes on her back. 2 months later, the judge granted the official divorce after failing to reach any agreement during court-mandated mediation. A 31-year marriage came to a bitter, painful end. We were at the courthouse that day to support my father, and though she had lost everything, her family, her reputation, her home, my mother still looked at Ray with pure hatred and resentment. In her eyes, he was still the reason it all fell apart. I was about to say something to defend my husband, but Ray gently stopped me. With rare compassion, he leaned in and whispered, "She's already lost everything. That's punishment enough." I was stirred by hearing those words full of grace and forgiveness. My chest tightened, and I felt an ache that was hard to explain. Here was the man who had endured years of insults, cruel treatment, and relentless judgment from my mother. Yet he was the first to show her mercy. At that moment, I realized how lucky I was to have Ray in my life. The following 2 years passed like a long, quiet dream, bringing with them a wave of healing and positive change in our lives. Callie is now 10 years old, a bright, joyful girl who no longer has to witness arguments or endure hurtful words. She's growing up in a loving and stable environment, something we used to only dream of. My father continues to live with and care for Grandma Linda, just as he always has. The good news is that he no longer lives under the shadow of sorrow and heartbreak, like he did in those early days. Time, in its quiet way, has softened the wounds in his soul. Now he seems more at peace, like he's found himself again. As for my mother and Daniel, after everything came crashing down, they decided to move away and start over somewhere new. I don't know exactly where they went. Only rumors that they left the state together for a fresh start. I had convinced myself I would never see my mother again, but life has a strange way of writing scenes you never expect. Just yesterday, on a calm, breezy afternoon, I was quietly trimming plants in our small backyard garden, a simple routine that brought me peace, when I saw her. She was standing outside the fence, staring in with pleading eyes. After 2 years, she looked completely different, much older. Her hair was now almost entirely gray, but her eyes struck me most, filled with a deep sorrow I had never seen in her before. I made the decision not to open the gate. I stood at a distance and listened to what she had to say. With a desperate, cracking voice, she begged me to let her see Callie, even if just once. "My only granddaughter," she said. At that, I cut her off. I reminded her that Jack, Daniel's son, was the grandchild she once proudly claimed, not Callie. She broke down in tears, real tears, pouring down her face uncontrollably. Then, through sobs, she apologized to me and Ray, raw, painful, and sincere, for the first time. And then she told me something that stopped me cold. Daniel's wife, the woman my mother once claimed was better than me, had had an affair with her boss. Jack, it turns out, isn't Daniel's biological son, which also means Jack isn't my mother's grandson. The irony was brutal. The child she once publicly denied, humiliated, and discarded, the one she said wasn't her blood, is in fact the only grandchild she truly has. Hearing her voice tremble as she spoke that truth, I felt the weight of fate's cruelty pressing down on all of us. But still, I didn't give in. I asked her calmly but firmly to leave. And then, without another word, I turned my back and walked inside without looking back. That night, after a warm family dinner at my father's house, I shared every detail of what had happened earlier. When I asked whether I had been too harsh, my dad and grandma fell silent momentarily. Then finally, they both said the same thing. "Whether you agree to it or not, we respect your decision. No matter what, she's still your mother." As for Ray, after thinking deeply and considering every angle, he said to me, "Maybe we should let her see Callie just once, 30 minutes, and only with you there the whole time." Now, I want to ask you, what do you think about this complicated situation? Should I let my mother see Callie again? Please leave your thoughts in the comments below. I truly want to hear your opinions and advice. And if this story touched you in any way, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share it so others can hear it too and share their perspectives. Thank you for sticking with me through this emotional journey.